So I decided I'm going to study this thing and understand it deeper, make myself understand why leaders behave the way they do. Generally, people talk about the dark side of leadership. So bullying is the dark side of leadership. So I'm done proving myself. I am about improving myself all the time. And leading with empathy and leading with compassion is having courage, and courage to be rejected.
Hey, my dear listeners, welcome back to Inspire Someone Today, your channel for amplifying inspiration. Joining us today is somebody all the way coming and sharing her thoughts from South Africa, Pretoria. Somebody who has made her life mission as rehumanizing the workplace one leader at a time. And we always thought the term, the word, the phrase bullying as something that was used at school. Have you ever thought about bullying at workplace? Not really, isn't it? That's exactly what our dear guest now will talk to us about. She's on a mission to create bully-free positive workplace environment. An adjunct faculty at Gordon Institute of Business Science. It's my pleasure and joy to welcome now to Inspire Someone Today. Now, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sri. It really is an honor for me to be here today. And thank you for your warm welcome.
Great. Like I mentioned in the intro, now when I was looking at your profile, what really intrigued me was, wow, here is somebody who is doing something unique. And that something unique was you're a workplace bullying practitioner. A term definitely not heard of much, particularly in this part of the geography. How did you get here? Is bullying at workplace real?
Absolutely. And I like how you introduced what you said, because often when people talk about bullying, you think about school grounds. You think about children in the school grounds, which is before I actually got into this work. That's also what I thought. How it came about, and I'll make the story almost like a summary of the story. I am a practitioner by background. Most of my time I spent in the workplace, and I'll speak about later on. I transitioned into academia, but my roots are really in practice, and that's why I call myself a pracademic sometimes, or a scholar practitioner. But how I got into bullying is that in my years in corporate, at the time I was working in one of the biggest banks in South Africa. And what happened was, to me at the time, what was going on, I did not know that it was bullying. And my manager at the time, the way the manager was behaving, the way the manager was managing, and so on and so forth, was particularly made for something. You know, every time something happened, I would look and say, what just happened there? Now, to cut a long story short, after one day of a particularly bad day, and I went home, and thanks to Google, I typed in whatever I typed in, and boom, what came out was that this actually has a name, and it's called workplace bullying. My first reaction, of course, was, as many people do, was when I looked at the behaviors that were described as bullying, I thought to myself, this is exactly what is happening. But my first reaction was like, no, I cannot be bullied. Because I'm strong, I speak out, I perform. Because that's also one of the misnomers around bullying, especially in the workplace. We tend to think of people that are being bullied or targets of bullies as people that are weak, that cannot speak for themselves. Yes, it might be true, but more often, even your strongest people and strongest performers are the ones that are targeted for bullying. So that's how, and then from then I became more curious. And of course at the time I was considering studying further, and I was considering studying PhD. And as they say, often authors talk about, the title or the book writes itself, the book finds you. And I think this area found me. And mainly because I thought to myself, even with a bad experience that I went through, my attitude in life is, even when something bad is happening, I always ask myself, what is the lesson here? What am I learning from here? What is the message from here? And at that point, as a student of leadership, I've always been interested in leadership. I thought to myself, the lesson here is how not to lead. And I decided that when I get into a leadership position, really strong leadership position, this is not how I'm going to lead. And that's really how it started. And at the time, I also, I had actually decided that I'm going for my PhD. I'm going to look at workplace bullying, but not as an interpersonal issue, but from an organizational issue. Because from the literature review that I did at the time, which is almost like 6-7 years ago, what I found was, first of all, there was not too much literature in South Africa on workplace bullying. Most of the literature and the research that was done from the West. So my interest was then to understand the concept from an African context, but in general, but specifically from a South African context. And the other thing that I realized was that most of the literature at that time focused more on the psychology part, as looked at bullying as an interpersonal issue between the bully and the person, the target. So I was much more interested in looking at its role, what organizational factors lend themselves to bullying thriving, happening, being possible, and thriving. And I was much more interested in also looking at leaders and the role of leadership. Because as you know, there's the most famous adage that people leave managers, they don't lead organizations. The shadow, I also talk a lot about the shadow of a leader. The organization takes the shadow of a leader. In other words, how a leader behaves impacts directly on the work environment. That's how I got into this. And then I made it my mission that I'm going to be part of a solution and not part of the problem. Because it's one thing to know what bullying is and that bullying exists. And because there is still almost like some form of a stigma to it, not many people talk about it. People that are being bullied are not comfortable to speak about it because there's also evidence that when you speak about it, more intimidation, you actually are likely to open yourself into more intimidation. So I decided I'm going to study this thing and understand it deeper, make myself understand why leaders behave the way they do. Generally, people talk about the dark side of leadership. So bullying is the dark side of leadership. But I wanted to shine a light into this dark side of leadership and do something about it. Because first of all, why can't we all get along? We spend a lot of time, so much of our time at work, and I've seen people suffer in silence, and I wanted to be part of a solution and actually raise awareness around this, which is often called the silent epidemic.
What a powerful start that was. Now, thank you so much for sharing that. And along with that, you made a couple of very profound statements there. One, making this very contextual, just not have it spread across, saying that, okay, bullying is the same across the globe, but it is contextual to the societies, to the countries that we live in. Two is the entire stigmatization of this stuff. Like you said, it's a silent epidemic. Lot many times it is seen as a sign of weakness rather than a sign of strength by virtue of stating this. I think you made some pertinent points there. We'll come to this. Along the way, doing all of these things, you also ended up coming up with a framework to make workplaces bully proof. If you can share, what is that 7-step process of making workplace bully proof?
It's actually very simple. I'm a big believer in removing complexity because especially, as professionals sometimes or practitioners, we tend to make things, especially things that not everybody is aware of or is not common, we tend to make them complex. So my steps or my framework is very, very simple. First of all, I think it starts with leaders. And, my whole thing is about rehumanizing the workplace one leader at a time. It starts with leaders, and leaders must set the tone from the top. And how do they do that? One of the ways they can start is actually take a stand against bullying. And that can start with developing anti-bullying policies. And we all know that, you can have the most wonderful policies in the world, but if you actually don't make them operational and actually connect them to what matters, for example, connect them to their values, to the organization's values, it's the same thing as values. Many organizations, we have values that we are beautiful and we put in beautiful pictures, but we don't live that. So for me, it's understandable for leaders to start with leaders, to take a stand, to make a statement that bullying is not tolerated, and therefore create an environment where actually we can talk about it. And one way is through developing and providing policies. But what it means, to your point that you made and which I made, is one thing about bullying also, which I'm now remembering now that I'm talking about it, is that it's complex. Often you talk about where does bullying start and end, and where does harassment start, and when you look at the all other negative acts at work. So which is why it is important to define for yourself in every organization, every leader has got to define for themselves, what does bullying mean for us? What is the meaning of bullying? And define it so that, and typically it ought to be behavior based. The next step is to constantly communicate those policies, make them alive, emphasize not just the bad stuff, but what is the desired behavior? What is the behavior that we as leaders desire for people in our organization to display? And one example is to tie with the values. And I often say that always, because if you have defined the desired values and then thereafter catch people doing the right thing, often what we do is we focus on the bad stuff. We focus on catching people when they're doing something wrong and when they are behaving badly, and then we punish them. So part of it is also how do we reward the desired behavior? And by reward, I don't mean necessarily all the time financially. And then the next step is to promote positive leadership. And what is that? One of the things that I really believe in, and what the pandemic has also taught us, is to lead. The best leaders lead with compassion, lead with empathy, and also tied to that, it creates transparency. So transparent leadership is also very important. But what it therefore means is that the leaders have got to be very clear about their role, about what they are about what kind of organization they want to create. And then create a culture of honest and two-way feedback, regular two-way feedback. Because often and my emphasis is on honest and regular and two-way. Because what that means is that everybody in the organization ought to be able to provide feedback to the leaders. It should not just be one way. But then the other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that even delivering feedback, it's very important how you do that. It has to be done in a respectable way. And the next step is just about training key staff and managers on how to recognize the signs of bullying, including what to do when the bullying is being reported. Because one of the things which is still a bit of a problem in many organizations is that when people complain or report cases of bullying, nothing actually ever happens.
How do you close the loop?
Yeah, when nothing actually ever happens, and it almost like provides an indirect message that, it's okay to do that, particularly as leaders. So therefore, tied to that is that it's important for leaders to address the cases of bullying, make it safe for people to speak up, because many people don't speak up because those that have spoken up have actually been, victims turned into targets of bullying themselves. There's another thing that comes to mind, and I always say this, but it can only happen when all these things are put in place, when leaders actually, as they say, walk the talk and behave in a way that model the behavior that they want everybody to behave in. The other last point is there's also a responsibility on employees. There's something called the bystander. Bystander is somebody that in bullying, typically there are three players. There's the target, or some people call them the victim, and there's the bully, and there is one player, which is the bystander. So the bystander is somebody that is witness to bullying, witnesses the bullying, but is not targeted themselves. Part of my work is I also work a lot with bystanders, and I start from the premise that there is no such thing as an innocent bystander. When you see something bad happening to somebody and you just watch and you do nothing about it, and you walk away and say, well, as long as it's not happening to me, there's a problem in that. And besides, that is also not sustainable, because tomorrow it might be you. So one of the ways that I work with leaders and with organizations is also to empower bystanders not to look away, because part of one way of actually breaking the cycle of this bullying, with all those things that I've talked about in place, is actually for people to speak up, and for people, particularly those that are not targeted themselves.
Oh, that's a wonderful framework. You did mention a couple of times around the role the leader plays in this kind of a setup. I'll come to that in a bit. Before that, have you seen what creates such kind of an hostile or a successful workplace? Is it the leader all by himself? Is it the environment? What are some of those indicators that makes you to feel that, okay, this is a great successful work environment, or this environment, by the smell of it, you can sense that, okay, this is hostile?
Yeah. Well, one of the other risk of sounding like a broken record, when we talk about the different forms of bullying, when I talk about corporate bullying, it's typically when the leader at the top does the bullying themselves. Because remember, you talk about the smell of the place. The smell of the place is going to follow what the leader, emits into the organization. Something that always stuck with me when I was I was working in an organization, and the person I was talking to gave such a powerful metaphor that stuck with me. And the metaphor they use is like an octopus spewing purple ink. Think about in a tank and spewing this ink, and how quickly it spreads throughout the organization. So that's one of the reasons that creates the hostile environment where the leader themselves is displaying this kind of behavior. Because if the leader is doing that, everybody kind of tends to follow and emulates the leader's behavior. And typically one of the reasons I will get when I work with people that have been accused of bullying, they would be like, no, I'm not a bully. I've got a strong leadership style and I'm driving performance. And I said, and I usually say, and you have every reason to drive performance. The main thing is the conduct, and I emphasize, driving performance and desirable conduct, because you don't have to drive performance and leave, people broken. So you can still be hard in your managing and set very strict standards and boundaries, but do it in a way that does not disrespect people, that does not, make you to get something out of people. You don't have to shout at them and kick the doors and things like that. So that's that. And then, of course, the opposite is also true, where a leader or leaders create a culture and environment where everybody else's voice is important. So even though you are the main leader and you are the final decision maker, but how you do it is creating an environment and a platform for everybody else's input to come in. And understanding that there is, these days we talk a lot about diversity, inclusion, belonging, where you actually do understand as a leader that there is such strong resourcefulness in diversity. And by diversity, I also mean diversity of thinking, diversity of ideas, diversity in terms of doing things differently. And when people feel that they are valued, feel that what they are saying matter, they feel that they contribute, they actually do more. And just recognizing the value that everybody else adds is also creates an environment. But what that means is that as a leader, you have to know your employees. You have to understand people. But most importantly, understand that your employees are not just workers. They are human too. So it means understanding what are their needs. These days, we've learned so much about from the pandemic. These days in the HR world, there's talk about when creating an employee value proposition, moving from an employee, talking about employee value proposition, but human-centered value proposition, because the people have got different needs and things might have changed. How it's not so much work is no longer just about physical space. It's about doing work, and it's about, understanding that these are the standards by which I'm expected, my performance is expected. How and when I do that, understanding that, it might be different from the way we used to do them. What that means, especially, there's something that I usually say, that leaders, by their very nature, sometimes you manage people, knowledge workers. And knowledge workers mean that you actually managing people that know more than you, more often than not. Because as a knowledge worker, it means that you're a specialist, perhaps. Your knowledge is deeper. So it's more about depth. So what you need to do as a leader, some of the great leaders, what they do is they provide the strategic direction and then get out of the way. Let people do what they do best. So that I find creates a very, very positive environment where people feel valued and people feel that they have the freedom to do what is best from, what they do best themselves and from their expertise.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Leadership, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starfleet Leadership Academy, its ongoing mission to develop leaders through Star Trek, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. A leadership development podcast told through the lens of Star Trek, the Starfleet Leadership Academy, available everywhere you listen to podcasts.
So very true. I think you touched upon quite a lot of things there. What really resonated with me, couple of things, is the human centricity around what we want to do with our working colleagues and creating that sense of belongingness, which we have very much seen in the post-pandemic world. Is what matters to everybody is the well-being of their people than anything else. And that throws up another dimension. I was kind of thinking about it when you were articulating this, is does the hybrid way of working make this whole situation even more complicated?
Yeah, it is, again, in my simplistic way of trying to, what the hybrid world is bringing is that I always look at a much more of a, what do they call this? I forgot the term, but I always look at situations at what opportunities is this presenting us? So a part of that, and I'm always, because, I'm a leadership, a student of leadership, I always look at the role of leaders. So part of that, again, I always start with leaders, is that leaders must also equip themselves to be able to lead in a multimodal way of working, because it's no longer just about, come to the office. We're all in the office, so we do this. So what do I mean by that? It means that they have to understand and create the work environments where, be clear about what work needs to be done or can be done in a hybrid way or completely online, where somebody's, sitting away from home doing that bit and sending it to somebody. But more complex work, tasks, which are innovative, face-to-face might be the way to go, because it might be much more valuable to be able to, when you're sitting with your colleagues, and because you feed on one another. So at the heart of it is trust. Leaders have to be able to trust colleagues, their employees, to be able to do what needs to be done and to work, especially in a hybrid environment. You have to trust people, your employees, to do that. And trusting them means not one of the things that, and I digress, but I think it's relevant. One of the things I'm thinking of last year sometime, one of the things that were rearing its, the way bullying was rearing its head differently was cyberbullying. Because everybody was working from home. So you had managers who wanted people to be online 24/7, because it was like, because you're not in the office, you're not traveling, you're home, you have to be online all the time, and constantly checking on people. Are you online? Are you working? And this and that. So this is why I say trust is very important. So what it means is that as a leader, you have to provide the tools that people need to work, and you have to provide the standards and the frameworks, the boundaries, what is expected of them, and trust that they're going to do that. I just remembered a client I worked with when everybody was scrambling around, what is this, and trying to understand the pandemic. And there was, there were hard lockdowns. This client of mine, many of the employees there did not have good working spaces. So what the CEO did was such a simple but very powerful thing, which later every employee talked about. He said, hey, because you don't have a space to work and don't have the right chair, take the chair from the office, take your big monitor, and gave them, the organization arranged for them to have access, stable access to Wi-Fi. So this is an example of what I meant earlier on when I said leading with care. because the CEO just did not think about, oh, not everybody, because you think your colleagues, the senior managers, you've got places where you can sit but many people don't. That's an example of how you can make the hybrid world work better and effectively. And it's just by leading with care and compassion and understanding this is the human-centric way, because it's also understanding that I'm human. When I'm now there, I'm a mother, some people were this or that. Now it means all the world have collided. So understanding that at a certain time, I have to do what I need to do. And I also need the right tools and the right space to be able to be productive.
Absolutely. And these are the new skills that leaders need to kind of hone in as we step into the new working world. Less toxic environments, so on and so forth. We'll take a detour here and we'll talk about things that's about now. 3 practices now has to keep her ahead of the game, professional game.
I create time. I have and I see Microsoft now does it recently. There's usually a day, at least every 2 weeks, where I block time in my calendar. And it's just for learning, for searching, for, what is happening, what new is happening. So knowledge is very important to me. So I block time to find, and typically I have sources that I go to. Sometimes I've got academic journals. Sometimes I go to practitioner journals like your Mackenzie's or this, that. But I'm also passionate about my continent. And I look at, what are some of the new things that are coming out from the continent, from some of the people, the professionals that I follow. So the quick and short answer after all that is I make time to learn. And the other is that I also give time to me, reflect, because, we're living in a world where everything is fast and we coming from this thing to the next, and to the next. Also, in my planning, in my calendar, I always plan for time, solitude time, to go away, be and reflect and just reconnect body, soul, mind, and reflect and just be and not worry about anything in the world, but worry about just re-energizing myself and making sure that I am whole and looking back and looking at the decisions that I've made and looking back, am I still on track? And then if I'm not on track or anything, that's also fine. I always try now. I think it's also a function of, having walked the journey that I've walked, is I cut myself more slack now, so, and understanding that it's okay. Life happens as it does, not as it should or as we think it should.
As you want it to be.
And the other, I just love the outdoors. And my outdoors is not camping. I love golf. So I spend a lot of time on the golf course because you're out in the open, you're walking in the air. And so those are some of my practices. But I also like quiet time. I mean, I spoke about it. So just stopping and be quiet is something I really, really put time for. Reflective time of quietness.
Great. 3 advices that has served you well in your career.
In my other life, I'm a coach. So I've always had a coach. So I think one of the person that pops to mind is my coach, who always, some of the things that he'd said to me, because I tend sometimes to think differently. And maybe there's too many things happening in my head. There's some kind of madness in my head. And I remember one of the things that he said to me, which I've always handled. It's actually interesting. I love this, Sri, because this question makes me now I'm surprised at what I'm remembering. One of the biggest advice that he has given me was trust your madness. He said to me, "Now, trust your madness because because you think differently or you do this or that, and it might be however people may see it at the time, but you have this way of thinking and the clarity of it. And sometimes it may not make sense in the beginning, or people will be like, what? Where is she going with this?" So the biggest advice he gave to me was trust your madness. The other one, which is also surprising me, which I remember, was from my supervisor when I was doing my PhD, because I believe in doing things thoroughly, no shortcuts and hours. And I remember my supervisor saying to me, it was like, "This is really great. But remember, what we're wanting to do here is for you to get your PhD. Get your PhD and you'll solve the world's problems afterwards."
Same advice there.
Yeah, so those are the two. I know you said three, but those are the two I could think of. Oh, and I suppose the other that also I'm now getting coming to mind is that you don't need permission to be kind.
Wow, so true.
You really don't need permission to be kind. Everybody should be kind and ought to be kind. Leaders, you don't need permission to be kind.
I think this is a must-ask question for you, particularly in the role that you're playing, which is 3 book recommendations from now.
3, only 3. Think Again. The one that pops to mind, Think Again by Adam Grant.
Adam Grant.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that book quite a lot. And Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. And which one now comes to mind? Those are the 2 that came. And any book by Ubuntu Leadership by Ruel Koza. He's a South African, and the Ubuntu is, much as everybody might say, it's an African philosophy, but all of us have live by the Ubuntu principle, which is I am because of them. Even when you think about it, every one of us, the journey that you have walked, that you could not have done it alone, even though you may be the one that's in the spotlight and you were sitting alone and doing things on your own, but you do that being held by other people. So that is the power of Ubuntu, at least in the African context and African philosophy. And the popular one, we are the village, or something like that. I can't remember what it is. And probably this is why we're having some of the problems that we're having, because we are slowly forgetting who we are and what we stand for. And that, as our arch, the beloved Desmond Tutu used to be so much about Ubuntu. Don't forget that. I am because of you. You are because of me. We.
So nice. It's so powerful. If you didn't have any limitations whatsoever, 3 individuals you would like to have breakfast with.
What comes to mind is Michelle Obama. And one of the things that she said was, when they go low, we go high. So that's what comes to mind. Because, I suppose the thing about that is that you will always be criticized, irrespective of what you do. And the other one that comes to mind is, I love your questions. What's her name again? She was the first woman president for Liberia. She was a very strong woman, and she came in during the time when the past president has literally destroyed, or there were a whole lot of problems in Liberia. Shirley
Sirleaf.
Yes, that's her. I would want to have breakfast with her and just learn from her in terms of what are the challenges she faced as a woman, as an African woman, the first African woman president of a country that has been in war for so many years. Who else? What's her name? Now I've forgotten her name. She's Nigerian. She's now the president of the ILO or director general of the ILO. So those are the people that come to mind. So the three people tend to be all women.
All women, that's what I was kind of thinking.
And powerful women, Africans or of African descent. This is what is going on in my head right now. Because one of the things I am really about is power is the biggest attribute anybody can have, especially Black women, successful Black women, but powerful Black women, is how to be powerful and soft at the same time.
So powerful and soft.
Powerful and soft at the same time. And when I look at these women, they're very, very strong and powerful, yet they are soft. And what makes them soft is that they care about others. It's not just about them. They use their platform, their powerful platform, for something good, to make an impact on people like them, or in societies and on communities. I suppose now that I think of it, and I'm very, very surprised. Thank you for that question. And I know I'm going to stay with this for a while. I'm probably going to look at these three women and say, why? Why did you come to mind? But this is about a strong, independent, and because often as women and as women of color, and I would imagine elsewhere, is women who are strong and independent are often seen or labeled as something else. Yet you can be strong, independent, and soft at the same time.
In some shape or fashion, these three women leaders are also demonstrating Ubuntu leadership.
Yes, they are demonstrating Ubuntu leadership, because they understand that even though they did all the work, their qualifications, and got there, but there's a whole community, villages, that were really, praising and behind them and really wishing them well.
Excellent. So now this is the last of the Power of Three round. We have taken a while to kind of get to this question, but it's been fantastic listening to all of your responses so far. I hope you live up to that bar that you have set. So the last of the Power of Three round is, what are the three things on your bucket list that you would want to accomplish?
Bucket lists, and in terms of accomplishing, it's actually quite weird. I am no longer about accomplishing. I'm about getting better all the time. So, and the reason I say this, because I've been in situations, for example, in corporate, where I was the only Black woman first Black woman at an exco, or then this, then, and this. And my thing now is, it's almost like at that time, because there were so few of us, there was a whole thing about, to succeed, you have to prove yourself. So I'm done proving myself. I am about improving myself all the time.
I know you're a big, big fan of Brené Brown. And one of the questions that I had, again, coming from Daring Greatly as well, is what is that leaders should have or prepare to manage and be courageous in situations when they encounter?
It is, and you're bringing an important thing, because leading with empathy and leading with compassion is having courage, and courage to be rejected. The world is looking for quick solutions and things like that. And I often talk about leadership is action. It being prepared to lead and to be courageous as a leader means actually taking action, and doing the things that you believe or you believe are the right ones, and you say you will do. So it's also being authentic. Part of being authentic is doing what you say you will do when you say you will do. So that's all you have. But the other thing is courage to know when to lead and when to follow. Because in order for you to be great leaders know when to follow. Because in specific circumstances, at a specific context, you may not be the smartest person in the room, or may not be the most qualified person to lead in terms of what needs to be done. So great leaders and courageous leaders, you need to know when to lead and when to follow.
Wonderful. And I love what you said. Leadership is action, not position.
Yeah. What that means, therefore, is that you can lead from where you are. Often when I work with young women, because I do a lot of pro bono work, working with women in corporate who want to go to one day want to be leaders of organizations, they're often, complaining, oh, my leader this, my leader that. And as I use the same phrase, but leadership is action. It's not necessarily position. There are certain things that you can do which do not need the position, which does not require the position for you to do the right thing. And some of the best leaders, I can't think of anybody may have been leaders without necessarily having the position. But it's actually under having a vision and a purpose and acting on that.
So very true. Now, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. I hate to do this, to say that we are coming to a close of this conversation. I loved every bit of the conversation that we have had. If there is that Inspire Someone Today message for all the listeners out here, what is now's Inspire Someone Today message?
Really, really be all of you. It's okay to be different. Because sometimes we always want to follow what everybody else is doing. We want to emulate, and we don't recognize the biggest star or pro or leader that is within us. So, as I say, you are doing the best that you can at this moment, but also trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust that you are the best, because you are. Everybody else has got a light. Let that light out. Let the world experience the warmth and the brightness from your light. Let it out.
Let it out. Shine the light on the world. On that note, now thank you so much for joining me and sharing these wonderful pieces of wisdom with me and with my listeners. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sri. I really, really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.